Good morning. Hello. Morning, everyone. Hi. Welcome back to day 2 of the Close Pine Gap Sacred Land Back Convergence. How beautiful everyone's wandering in. How was last night? Brilliant. Good to hear. Good to hear. Might just wait a sec for last few people to settle. For those of you that weren't here yesterday, my name's Jem from Bantu for Palestine and the Loud Jew Collective, and really stoked to welcome you guys back today to this incredible convergence. Louder? Louder. Okay, what about now? All right, I'm almost kissing it. Ow! Okay. All right. Just to settle in this morning, please take a moment with me to acknowledge the Aranda people as sovereigns of the land upon which we meet. We're surrounded by First Nations power and knowledges in this landscape itself and in the generosity of the Hayes family who have welcomed us here to learn about their fight for land justice of their sacred site, Goyamba. We pay respects to them, to their families and countrymen and their elders, past, present and emerging. And we pay respects to all First Nations people here. We recognise the interconnectedness of Indigenous knowledges and resistance to colonial oppression, and we're honoured to stand in solidarity. From the river to the sea, this always was and always will be. I thought today we could just ground with a poem from a local Aranda poet. We're very proud that here on Aranda land is the first and only Aboriginal controlled and owned publishing press, Running Waters Community Press. It's pretty incredible organisation and is it's a node for resistance and knowledge and teaching and sharing writings and poems. We have here today one of the publications from Running Waters Community Press, Women's Talk, and I will say it in Aranda. I will try to say it in Aranda, which is a beautifully complex language for me to get my mouth around. This is Arulkun Unkunja, Women's Talk. So these books are available to buy and browse. We've also got Living in Hope. I think that they'll be set up by the welcome tent. So please go down to the welcome tent and you can have a look at this beautiful, beautiful book of poetry, and we can support the press to really have the resources they need to, fulfill the incredible potential. This poem is by Shirley Nwara Turner, and it's called Look Carefully. And if you feel to, you can close your eyes and listen to her words. When I look carefully at this jar of water, it looks so calm and still. But when you pour some water in a glass, there are bubbles, some air. Now you know. Water is not water. It is a living thing. It is like a person that doesn't want to be touched or hurt. Oh, sorry, that's just really hit me. Yeah, it's very special to be here with all of you, sharing these experiences of being broken open to the pain of what's happening in our world currently, and the joy and fierce resistance of engaging with that through our relationships with each other and our relationships with the earth. Yesterday was a really incredible experience of the conversation between humans and non-humans, spirit, people from different communities. And thank you so much to our speakers. Lots of people travelled very far to be with us and to share their stories and their analyses and their visions. And it was incredible. So please show your love to our speakers from yesterday. The Hayes family, Catherine Gilby, Rema Naji, Farah, Ahmed Adam, Justice Not Jails, Laniuk, Terrakura, Barb Shaw, Arnie Barb Flick, Helen O'Sullivan, Adam Adelpour, Alex McInnes, Lee Rhiannon, Zelda, Jorgen Doyle, and Nat Farah. We've got another huge day today, so I won't hold you up for too long. There's a couple of housekeeping things. Just a reminder about the sacred trees on this site, the corkwoods and the ironwoods. Please feel free to spend time with the trees, but respect them and don't break any branches or gather wood that seems to be just kind of firewood. It's not. It's in its right place. We're here at the Desert Knowledge Precinct. So lucky to be on this site. So again, like yesterday was so beautiful, and everyone was extremely respectful of this centre of Indigenous excellence. So if we could do that again today, that would be really pertinent. Bachelor Institute is also on this site, so if we could stay away from anything that's cordoned off or behind bunting, that would be appropriate. We've got a kids' space here and a jam-packed program for kids today with soft sculpture, banner painting, face painting, theatre workshop. It's off the chain, so feel free to all go over there and get your faces painted. And kids 4 years and over are welcome to be dropped there. Just parents, please have a phone on you in case our childcare folks need to contact you. Anything else? Really, I think that's it. Let's welcome the speakers to the first plenary.
Should we get going? Good morning, everyone. I hope everyone slept well, or well enough, and were warm enough, and had a boogie last night. I actually went for a walk up to the telegraph station at sunset, and it was so beautiful. It's such a privilege to be on this country. My name is Jessie Boylan. I work with photography, video and sound, and also work for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, ICAN. Your facilitator this morning. I would just also like to say that it's such a privilege to be on Aranda country, and thank you to Felicity and the Hayes family for welcoming us yesterday morning. And as Catherine Gilbney said yesterday, we can really see the strength and generosity of the people welcoming us here. I would also like to acknowledge any Aboriginal people here in the room and elders past and present. And I keep coming back to this statement that North American scholars Eve Tuck and Kay Wayne Yang saying that decolonisation is not a metaphor, that it's an ongoing process, and as Warramai woman Genevieve Greaves says, it's a shared endeavour. So thank you to all of you for coming here to have these important conversations. And to the amazing crew who have put this on. What a massive effort. So this morning we'll travel many lands where militarism, extractivism, First Nations struggles intertwine, and also where resistance meets. From Pine Gap here on Aranda land to missile testing at Woomera and Gukutha land to the proposed nuclear-capable B-52 bombers at Tyndall, to Wajak Noongar country where the AUKUS nuclear submarines will be based, to Arnangu Pitjantjatjara Yankunytjatjara lands where people are still living under the shadow of the nuclear testing program from the 50s and 60s. And to the halls of Parliament on Ngunnawal and Ngambri country, and to Palestine, Lebanon and beyond. So no small conversation ahead of us. We're going to deep dive into Australia's entanglement in the US military alliance and what it means for sovereignty, land and community across the continent and overseas. So I'd just like to introduce our wonderful panel. We have at the end Karina Lester, Yankunytjatjara Ananu woman. Second-generation nuclear test survivor. Karina's father, the late Yami Lester, was blinded by the black mist fallout from Totem 1 at Emu Field. That was the British nuclear test, first mainland test that was detonated in South Australia in 1953. Karina works with the University of Adelaide's mobile language team as the Aboriginal co-manager and language worker. She is an ICAN Australia ambassador and also serves as a commissioner on the AUKUS public inquiry. Plus probably about 10 other hats that she's often wearing. We've got Aunty Sue Coleman Haseldine, a Gugutha woman. From South Australia. She's been fighting for country, culture and animals for a long time. She's the president of the Australian Nuclear Free Alliance, ANFA, and she's dedicated to fighting for the rights of the planet and future generations against anything and everything that threatens them. She's also a nuclear test survivor and was a child when at Cuniba Mission when the British carried out nuclear testing at Emu and Maralinga. We've got David Shoebridge. Australian Greens Senator for New South Wales, long-time environmental and social justice advocate, currently holds portfolios in justice, defence and digital rights. He's a defender of human rights and has been outspoken on issues from Gaza to climate justice, challenging corporate power while advocating for grassroots democracy and ecological sustainability. And we have the lovely Rita Jabri Markwell, a human rights and public interest litigation lawyer and public policy contributor. Over her career, she has worked for Muslim, Aboriginal and Stolen Generations advocacy organisations as a ministerial advisor. It's an honour to be up here with you all. So together we're going to try and unravel the pervasive secrecy, obfuscation and lack of transparency that government and companies use to keep us all in the dark. And we'll also discuss how we got here and how we might be able to untangle ourselves, and how we can also build alliances that are based on our shared humanity, not our shared destruction. So I thought I would start by asking everyone to expand a little bit on those bios and introduce more about where they grew up and how they got into the work they're doing today. And I was thinking, Karina, could we start with you?
Thank you, Jess, and good morning, everyone, all you wonderful people. I too want to acknowledge that I am on Aranda country, and I grew up on Aranda country as well. So thank you, Aunty Felicity and the Hayes family, for your warm welcome yesterday. As Jess said, I'm a Yankunytjatjara woman from the Arnongo, Pitjantjatjara and Yankunytjatjara lands. I'm the youngest daughter of the late Yami Lester and late Lucy Waniwa Lester, who were a big part of this community as well back in the 70s and 80s, which is where I spent a lot of time growing up on country. And it was on this country that Dad had sort of pushed hard around the Royal Commission into the British nuclear testing. I know he'd reached out to many of the Aranda elders at the time, back in the 70s and 80s, on getting guidance and leadership, and also how he started to sort of work down south of the border as well. Yankunytjatjara country comes into the territory, so, you know, we've got all these borders that sort of box us in, but I feel part of the Northern Territory because Yankunytjatjara country is also around the Uluru region as well. So as the youngest daughter, Dad was Dad, but it wasn't later in life when there was a lot of activity happening south. After those tests that took place, as Jess said, there was first mainland test that took place at Emu Field with Totem 1 and Totem 2. Totem 1 was the one that had the fallout over Walyajara at Wallatina, which is where Dad is now resting, home on his traditional lands. And that was where he witnessed the horrors of that black mist. And he would have been a young boy then, 12, roughly, born in the bush, Dad was. So as a young boy growing up, he witnessed this trauma and this tragic experience and saw what his people went through. By 4 years after that, his world turned into complete darkness. So at a very young age of 16, 17, and I have two young men, boys, I should say men because they're adults now, one that's 18 and one that's 20. And when they sort of hit that age, I knew that that was a time that when Dad was going through what he was going through as well, readjusting, learning new skills, learning how to live his life in darkness. And so knowing that story with Dad, and then knowing what Nana, Mrs. Brown, Gumpawater Brown, Bingainjana, like they're all part of that Western Desert Yankunytjatjara community, knowing their stories as well of what they witnessed, and then again pressures of what happened with, you know, governments of the day wanting our traditional lands to be the lands for a nuclear waste dump. And it was probably those late 90s, like I'd already known Dad's stories. I didn't know details of Dad's story, but then I really stepped into that work around when Howard was pushing for a nuclear waste dump at a location in South Australia called Billakalina. And Gulbaridi Gungayura was formed, and there's probably many of you in the crowd here that remember forming of Gulbaridi Gungayura. I know there were Melbourne Gungas, Naarm Gungas involved in that protest as well, and that campaign that ran for a couple of years. And that's when I really started to step in. And one of the big messages from there, from Nana Mob, from Nana Gumpawaranjana, was that it was everybody's issue. It wasn't just an Arnongo issue. It wasn't just a Gugada issue. It wasn't just an Atyamatna issue. For mobs, it was everybody's. I know Nana was worried about where waste was going to be transported to. And that really then opened these other doors for me. And so I've been able to sort of step into these other positions as well. But that's been a long journey, and it's a generational journey in my own family. When I know Nana Gumpawater Mob were there witnessing this fallout, Dad moving in his direction of, bringing Australia to account, holding Australia to account of what took place back then with the British nuclear testing. And then my bits of work that I do, and as Jess mentioned, I'm a ICANN ambassador. And that piece of work is leading me into the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And so there's a lot of doors that are sort of opening, but this ongoing struggle for us First Nations mob, for us Arnalura, from the country that I come from, the need for us to continue to share those stories, speak up strong about those lived experiences as well, because our lived experience is so important in that treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons, but so important in reminding our Australians, fellow Australians, and generations this story of what happened, that they actually tested in oceans at Montebello Island, that they tested on South Australia at Emu Field, first mainland test, and then they continued on down to Aunty Sue's country, on Gurgada country, testing nuclear weapons further. And so that's kind of how I kind of stepped into this role and into this work that I do today. And as Jess mentioned, I've just put a hat on to be one of the commissioners for the AUKUS public inquiry. So a little busy.
Sometimes you go home.
Busy woman, eh? Yeah, I was being two-faced. I told her to steady off and stay home a little bit. Then I looked at my own agenda and said, that wasn't fair. But yeah, no, I'm from down south, June way. I was a child at Kaniba Mission when the atomic bomb started off at Maralinga. So I don't remember much, but the oldies would tell us stories about what they thought was the Nullarbor dust storm, but it was actually the fallout from the radiation, fallout rolling in on the communities. So I started really fighting when I lost my thyroid, so I didn't know why. Cancerous thyroids, and then I went to ANFA, the Australian Nuclear Free Alliance, and I found out there why, this was hitting our communities. Cancers, heart attacks when the young men, there should have been no reason for. But I started fighting anything nuclear then. I joined ICANN too for a while, but Karina's younger and she can do a lot more. But, now we've got AUKUS and we've got rocket testings, and it's like it never ends. It's one thing after another. Americans are involved with AUKUS, the Americans are involved with the rocket testing on my country. They're just everywhere. I wish somebody would tell them Yankees go home. But, and then we've got the government that totally ignores us, and they work through native title, that evil thing called native title. They've never had consent from our people to, extract uranium to go up and bomb Nagasaki and Hiroshima. They've never asked us consent for anything destructive, because we wouldn't give it. We're peaceful most of the time. We would like to... Oh, I forgot to say thank you to the family for that nice welcome too. But I've got an excuse, it's called old age. But, there's been no consent for any of this, and it's still going on. The rockets that come back from America to land on my country was deemed too dangerous to return back to America, to California, but it's okay for our dumb government to put their hands up and say, drop it on our country. If it's too dangerous for America, it's got to be too dangerous for us. But our government won't do anything. They just hand in hand with anything that's going to make them a little bit of money, maybe. Then the waste dumps. They want to turn South Australia into the defence state and the waste state. We're going to fight them all the way, because I've got 4 generations, and within that 4 generations, the fallout from Maralinga is still happening, right down to little grandchildren, great-grandchildren, defects, and there's a lot of miscarriages. Like I said earlier, a lot of young men, triple heart bypasses at 40. This is unheard of. And I blame the whole lot on Maralinga and the government. And I'll keep fighting for the rights of the next generation. Because if that mob don't care about their kids, well, I feel sorry for their kids, but I care about every one of our kids. And I really want to thank everybody, everybody that's here supporting, because we could not do this fight on our own. We need every one of us. And if we lose, so does everybody else. Thank you.
Well, it's not fair coming after two exhausting and impressive women like that. But I too want to thank for the welcome. And this extraordinary act of generosity that First Nations people still feel capable of doing. And I think about, from my own cultural roots and connections, if I could have that generosity after the violence and the dispossession, the poisoning that has been repeatedly happening to my country, if it had been happening on my country. And that's why I think when we get welcomes like that, let's grab it with both hands, with the gratitude and then a sense of mutual obligation to lean back into it. This is amazing country. I grew up in northwest Sydney on Gringai land, and I was surrounded by nature, and it was one of the most magical things about where I grew up. Literally I could run down the end of the street and go off into a national park. And I suppose that love of nature was part of my growing up. It was never political, my family. And I really got my sense of politics when I got my first serious job, second serious job, working for a law firm that acted for the Maritime Union and the Construction Union, and doing the work for them, watching them taking on capital, basically, and trying to get a fair share back and safety. And it was in that work that I first got a sense of the Greens, because I went into the state parliament and I watched the Labor Party and the coalition and everyone smashing into workers' rights. And there was this one party and this handful of MPs who were there fighting the fight for social justice. And actually she's here at the moment, Lee Rhiannon, who I first met at that moment. And I saw her do the fight, and it was at the same time where the anti-war movement was building, the very early 2000s, and then those threads came together for me: nature, social justice, and peace. And that's when I joined the Greens. And I suppose that journey has taken me into state parliament, doing a lot of work with First Nations justice in state parliament, and then in 2022, when the sort of movement sends you into somewhere like the Senate, you ask yourself, well, what's the work you can do there that is needed? What's the work you can do most? And for me, one of the key things was to be that sort of, if you like, that voice and the statement for the peace movement and the anti-war movement, the anti-nuclear movement, and to join those threads together. And I sometimes feel like it's a privilege to be there in those spaces that are just fueling war and fueling conflict and heading us down this path and trying to be some kind of rational voice, some kind of, at least a pushback, a counterweight for peace and disengagement from this incredibly dangerous, toxic path we're on. And, when I'm in those rooms sometimes, I've by myself with 100, 150 people with gold braid on their shoulders and, billions of wealth behind them pushing us down to war. I'm sitting there by myself, and I never think I'm by myself because I know I'm actually in places like this. So that's why we're in this movement. Thank you.
We're so lucky to have you in there, David. Thank you. Rita, would you please?
Yeah, so thank you to the Hayes family too for your beautiful welcome. I'm currently living in Megangan, Brisbane, and I grew up for many years on the Gold Coast with the Bundjalung community mainly. With my mum was a TAFE worker, and she worked with a group of deadly First Nations women. And those women became my aunties when I was growing up. And Aunty Joyce Summers, who's still alive today, is my mother's main remaining friend, as my mum's now very elderly, has Alzheimer's, and Aunty Joyce still visits her every week and still looks after her. And Aunty Joyce, when I was a teenager, said to me that I was very bossy and I should...
Things have changed.
I should consider getting into politics so I could take up a fight. And anyway, I started working in Aboriginal legal rights movement on the Trevorrow Stolen Generations test case, and Stolen Generations always very close to me because my mother suffered, my grandmother suffered a child removal when she was young, a child stolen from her. And my family, obviously, my father is Lebanese. He's a Lebanese migrant. So we grew up fighting for free Palestine, free Lebanon. And all those stories were together in my identity and my bringing up. And obviously, Pauline Hanson happened when I was a teenager, and 9/11 happened when I was at the beginning of university, and my universe started to contract somewhat. But I ended up in Parliament working for the Labor spokesperson for Indigenous Affairs in opposition and then in government. And in that time I worked on the apology to First Nations people and the Stolen Generations, which was the only really positive thing that I feel like I worked on in that time. I mean, there were other positive things that I worked on, but it was also a very difficult time because I saw the violence that happens against First Nations people in Parliament, and I really felt like I was co-opted into carrying out that violence against people who I love. So I occasionally... Occasionally, when I'm in sittings like this, I do ask for forgiveness from First Nations people. I know that... I know, I don't need to, but... Anyway, I'll keep moving on so I can recoup myself and keep talking.
Thanks everyone. Thank you for sharing some of that. I feel like it's so important hearing more of people's stories and backgrounds and why we came here. And every single one of you in the room has a story to tell. And I think that's what connects us. It's not just these issues that we're going to talk about next. It's all of those backgrounds, all of those stories that connects us beyond, beyond the kind of, what's on the surface. So thank you for sharing that. And I wish we could have just a conversation about that. Maybe we'll do this again sometime when you're free next. But let's move now. I was thinking, we're going to go from the past to where we are, and then also to where we're going to go in the future, where we hope to go in the future. So, David, I was wondering if you could locate us now, tell us a bit more about Pine Gap, and I'm conscious that there's a whole range of knowledge and understanding about the US alliance, about militarism, about what Pine Gap does. And I just thought I'd throw that lovely, broad and specific topic to David to tell us a bit more about.
Yeah, tell us everything about AUKUS.
Tell us everything about everything, please.
Yeah. I did once give a very long speech in State Parliament. But it is, one of the reasons I think we're here, this fundamental reason we're here is, barely, 15 Ks from here, is Pine Gap. And Pine Gap has a very central role in the US global military deployment. And that has been, an expanding role that Labor and coalition governments seem willing to give. It's notionally a joint facility, which it doesn't mean it's a big cannabis farm over in there, but it's a meant to be Australian-US facility. But the truth is, as a senator, I'm not permitted to go there. You're not allowed in. Elected representatives can't. There's no show and tell. It's a US facility that is partly staffed for and partly paid and overwhelmingly paid for by the Australian taxpayer. And I think we should be clear about it. It's not a joint facility. And it's one of its principals' role is to pull together information being downloaded by US satellites and the US global sort of intelligence gathering, and to crunch some of that data and information and then feed it back into the US military. So we know, for example, from whistleblowers, not from any formal government reports, that it's been critical in providing targeting data to the Israeli military and the US military in the strikes in Gaza, in Lebanon and in Iran. That targeting data and information is being sent from here. It's also connected to Northwest Cape, that Harold E. Holt communications facility on northwestern Australia, which is up just north of Broome in northwestern northwestern Australia. And the role of that facility It's been expanded to do space communications, but its principal role at the moment is to communicate with submerged US nuclear submarines, to send their messages and directions. So if ever the message from the US military to end the world as we know it happens, to launch their intercontinental ballistic missiles from their submarines, that'll probably be beamed into Pine Gap and then sent from Pine Gap to Northwest Cape, and the message will go out and the world as we know it will end. So we'll be the sort of the handmaidens of that through our role with the United States. Just north of here too, well, not just north, about 150 k's south of Darwin is RAAF Tyndall, which is meant to be an Australian Air Force base, but its primary role at the moment has been to expand the tarmac there, and very large project to extend it. It now has a cycling through RAAF Tyndall US B-52 jet bombers, those big old jet bomber planes that are designed to deliver nuclear weapons and ordnance around the world. That now is expanded, and US nuclear-capable B-52 bombers are popping into RAAF Tyndall, just north of us. And when we asked the government, well, why are you permitting nuclear weapons to be stationed in Australia on B-52 bombers, we get this statement. It's like, how dare you ask that? How dare you politicise this? Don't you know what our formal position is in relation to those B-52 bombers? And our formal position is we don't ask if they've got nuclear weapons on them, and the US doesn't tell us if they've got nuclear weapons on them. That's the courageous position adopted by our government.
But also that we have full knowledge and concurrence of what they...
Yeah, and... You can fall down into these rabbit holes of their language. So what happens in Pine Gap, what happens in RAAF Tyndall, what happens with the thousands of US Marines stationed in Darwin and now permanent storage of their equipment, what happens in Northwest Cape, what's happening in the nuclear submarine base we're building for the United States right now just off Perth. So in an existing Australian submarine base that's on Garden Island, just off Fremantle in Perth, us collectively, the Australian taxpayers are spending $8 billion converting that into a US nuclear submarine base, which will be up and running by next year, where the US will be able to station 5 nuclear submarines there. The reason they want that is because it's a shorter trip up to go and make war with China from the west coast of Australia than it is from San Diego on the west coast of the US. So we're building that. But when we challenge that and we say, well, what on earth are we doing building all these US bases? We get this bullshit response that, oh no, these are all joint facilities and they all operate with full knowledge and concurrence. And we say, well, what does full knowledge and concurrence mean? Does it mean you know what the US is doing, sending targeting information to the US military and the Israeli military? Is that what it means? Oh, well, we're not going to talk about that. We're not going to identify that. And the truth is, I think, even the Australian military, the Australian Signals Directorate, they don't really know what's going on any of these bases. They are foreign bases for a foreign military. And right here in the Northern Territory, we're in what is increasingly looking to me like a sacrifice zone for the US military. This is a bit of the country they're happy to put on the front line in a war. They're happy to turn into a militarised resource, fossil fuel sacrifice zone for US corporate interests and the US military. And is it any wonder that First Nations peoples, traditional owners, want these facilities off their country? Because it's not keeping us safe. And, we can talk about what's happening in the world. Increasingly, people can see US bases don't even come, they've never made us safe. But right now, they are super making us a target.
Yeah, and thanks, David. And yeah, as wonderful researchers, Richard Tanter and Vince Scapatura, who you'll hear from later in a workshop via Zoom, they said the government either knows and they're not willing to tell us, or they don't know, and both are completely embarrassing and utterly unacceptable. So yeah, thank you. I was wondering also, we were thinking about why here. Why is Pine Gap here in the centre of Australia? I mean, I think we can imagine why. A few of us can think about the Terra Nullius continuing and, there's no one there and it's big, wide open space. But I Are there other, direct counterparts? We've got Menwith Hill in the UK, and the US has more than 700 bases outside of the US as well. So why here? Does anyone want to say?
Just listening here, how Trump always says America first. Yeah. Well, the US can say, hey, don't bomb us. We haven't got anything. It's all over there in Australia. Go bomb them. It's like passing off all their horrible, poisonous stuff to another nation and keeping theirs safe. That's what I was just thinking about when you were talking. Mm. They haven't got anything to bomb over there, but we got it all over this way. That's scary.
Yeah. David?
Yeah. And I think we should be clear about, one of the reasons why they're making such an effort to locate this hardware, this material, this military footprint inside Australia, right? And it is because it's the whole AUKUS thing, the nuclear submarines, that whole project is designed to enmesh us in the US military, and not as some kind of equal player, but as literally the 51st state. The phrase they use in defence is an interoperable part of the US military. That's what we're designed to be. That's their official phrase for it, interoperable. But why is it happening in Australia? Well, because the US military planners, when they war game, they have a look at their existing set of bases in the Western Pacific, Okinawa, from Japan to Okinawa, down through the Philippines. They're looking at those bases and their war gaming are saying, well, they're largely going to be out of action in the first 24 hours because of the increased capacity of the Chinese military. And in any conflict, they're basically going to be gone. And, you talk to those people with US bases in that region and they are deeply frightened and even more adamant to resist and get rid of the occupation because they can see that as well, that they are literally the first line of the sacrifice zone. So if they all go, where does the US want to fight its war from? Where does it want to put the new front line? Well, we're here. We are it. And this isn't about sort of US superiority or some, increasing US capacity. We're here because of US relative strategic weakness. And they have decided that they're quite happy to have the front line through the middle of Australia. What I cannot believe, and what just does my head in, what the hell are our political leaders doing and our military doing, volunteering our country, our continent and this land as being the front line?
Well, maybe we can get more into that soon. Yeah, I was talking with Apelli Lasuma, who's from the Pacific Network Against Globalization, and he was saying, Pacific feels that Australia is using them as a sacrifice zone, as a buffer zone. First they go through the Pacific and then they come to Australia, so it's this trickle down.
And you look at what we've been doing with our Pacific neighbours, like signing up all of these treaties. And overwhelmingly, when we talk, when we meet, my office, our party, our movement meets with Pacific leaders, their biggest existential threat is climate, right? And they want us to keep our coal and gas in the ground. They want us to meet the climate emergency. That's their existential threat. And we go over and meet them and strong-arm them and say, well, actually, the threat you should be worried about, the threat that if you don't help us meet, we're not going to give you aid, we're not going to give you access to jobs, is actually the Chinese military. And we're forcing these bilateral defence agreements on them. And the Pacific have said they don't want the US military, they don't want the Australian military, they don't want the Chinese military. They want Pacific to be a Pacific of peace. And we keep, and even in the most recent announcement, They use the language about the Pacific, the Peace Alliance or a Blue Pacific Peace Alliance. Our government uses that language, but then co-opts it into a militarised, nasty militarised narrative, and and that is directly contrary to the call we're hearing from our Pacific neighbours.
Yeah, I was just thinking about more around where are we now. With Rita, Karina and Aunty Sue, maybe you could talk just a little bit, maybe Aunty Sue, about what's happening on your country now with rocket testing and what you know, what they're testing or what you don't know.
What I don't know is what they don't tell me anything. And that's including the ADF. They're liars. That guy said, your safety is paramount. Next thing the rocket goes over the top of my head. And I get buzzed with helicopters when I'm on country. I get abused by own mob that are following the native title trail and, give us some money and you can destroy everything. They started off telling everybody, Southern Launch that is, that they were going to be testing pharmaceuticals in space. So I said, okay, so what happens to those pharmaceuticals when you bring them from that atmosphere back to ours. And oh, shut up. You don't ask that stupid question. But it's no pharmaceuticals in space. It's war. They're testing, rocket testing. You know, everybody's heard of Thales, Germans, hypersonic, the Canadian VADA, not the Canadian, the American VADA. They're the return mob that are coming, and just the warning on the air highway is 6 o'clock in the morning on the radio. Users of the air highway, please be aware of falling space debris. That's the warning that comes through. We get nothing. And when I go out on country and protect country, I'm in danger all the time from them. And the people that come with me, I've got a fantastic group of people that believe in what I do and follow me. And I'm saying, hey, come on, I don't mind putting my life on the line, but what about you young ones? I said, that's what we're here for. And, you know, like, I don't know how to answer them, but I worry for them because they're in this, you know, they're the future generations. I've lived my life, but I'm still fighting for them, and I'll continue to do that. But you know, as far as that, as far as all those lies that are coming out of Southern Launch, and the mining companies I think they might be done and dusted in that area, because Southern Launch is trying to join my country up with the Woomera protected range. That means up, yeah, it is. It's scary too. And that means a huge chunk of South Australia will be closed off to the public. Yeah. And I'm just saying, well, I'm on country, I'm not leaving. It's not terra nullius like they're trying to say. Animals are out there. And we go out on rock-hole trips looking after country, making sure the animals have got clean water, and we're just keeping it alive, and all they want to do is destroy it.
And
yeah.
And Aunty Sue, I've been on a few of those rock holes trip, and that's where I first met, well, actually I probably met you at an AMFA back in when it was called Alliance Against Uranium, and then we needed to shift to positive language and made it the Australian Nuclear Free Alliance. But yeah, also there's someone just handed me that there's some QR codes for your petition against Southern Launch, so make sure to sign up to that as well. And yeah, Aunty Sue, talking about the rock holes trips, like they've been going for about 20 years. And
yeah, they've been 20 years with the volunteers.
Yeah.
My family's been going out all the time, but then things got pretty heavy, you know, so we needed help. And like I said before, we can't do it alone. We need help from everybody.
I remember being out there with you and at Inler and saying, you know, we have to come out here on country and prove, you know, to government, to mining companies that we're here using and looking after this land so they don't mine it. Can you tell us a little bit, like, about wins, you know, and some of that, as well as bringing everyone together? Like, it's nice to celebrate all of what we have done and also what we don't know we have prevented sometimes when we've been on country for so long fighting, you know, and yourselves have been on country so long.
Yeah, it's that bringing and sharing of culture, you know, cross-cultural sharing has been good. It's taught a lot of people over the 20 years or so. But what was the other question?
Some of the wins.
Well, yeah, some of the wins is we did stop one of the mining companies and we just held a blockade out on country for 2 weeks. And then ABC rang me and asked me if I had a bulldozer as a hostage. I said, there was a bulldozer here, but I never thought it was a hostage. But we eventually let them take their bulldozer out of, providing they left country. And they haven't been back there, so that was a major win. And the other smaller wins I'm getting now, that was miners, now it's rockets. The smaller wins I'm getting now is getting this word out. And they're a little bit scared. They even offered me a job.
That'll shut her up.
Cultural monitor? Yeah, so I can go up in the helicopter and say, oh, there's nothing here, you can destroy country. I said, we'll pay you. And I said, go away. It's all about money to them and, you know, greed, and they don't care about anything else but what they're doing, and what they're doing is evil. And they're doing it with the help of native title. But we are going out and we're letting them know you're not going to get away with this. This is not terra nullius. We are here and we're going to stay here. The animals are here and we're going to protect them the best as we can.
Aunty Karina, you mentioned before some of the fights against waste dumps, and those ones go back a long time with the Kupapiti Kungajuda and connected with Woomera as well. I was wondering, you know, and we've also got the Chandler waste dump that's coming up now. I was wondering if you could talk a bit about a lot of those struggles and all the different ways in which they're connected.
There is no textbook when it comes from... Turn it that way. When it comes to managing waste, you know, these big smart countries and, you know, big players across the globe, such as the US and the UK, have no plan for their waste. That's one thing I'm very worried about with this AUKUS agreement, because Australia could potentially be the waste dump of the world, which is something that we have fought in South Australia. So with Gulbabidi Gungajuda, we were very strong against that, and we were really strong against the knowledge, that cultural knowledge. So shout out to countrymen in this space. We need to keep culture strong. We need to keep our languages strong. We've got roles and responsibilities, and that was really solid in the Eradiwandi campaign. They were really staunch, those old women who really stood strong against and said, you know what, Howard, you don't know anything about our Wabar, about our Jogorba. We're here to tell you. So that was really powerful for us. That was inspiring for me as a young Gunjara woman growing up, having those leaders before me to stand really strong. And that's part of the work that I do at the university now, is language work around keeping our languages strong and alive and passed on to generations as well, because that is something that we can hold on, and that government's got no knowledge and understanding about that cultural connect that we have to country. So that was really important for us in that campaign. And then, of course, it settled, and then it came back up again when Jay Weatherill, our Premier at the time in South Australia, decided to have a royal commission into the nuclear fuel cycle. And so that was a really challenging space. I had to, along with other First Nations mob, push our way and manoeuvre ourselves into the conversations and the space. And I know that we'd put a few people's noses out of joint, such as Business SA. They were a bit taken back on, we've got First Nations mob sitting around the table, and it was so important that we were there. That came out in the Royal Commission that, you know, just Democracy Co had run that process. There were 300 jurors handpicked, and we just constantly had to, as First Nations mob, push our way to make sure that our voices were there. There were two forums that we pushed hard for. One was for us to present to the whole 300 jurors to let them know where we were coming from as First Nations mob. And that was a call out to all our South Australian First Nations mob to come together there in Adelaide to stand strong and to share our stories and our reasons why. And then there was a funny little process. I called it speed dating, but there was groups of 10, because there was 300, and they split us up in 3. So I was accompanied with my late sister, Rose Lester. Sis was part of it. We were all Yankunytjatjara women in that space, but they split us. And I had 100, Sis had 100, and one other young sister girl of mine as well, Simone Tur, academic at Flinders University, staunch woman, had another 100 herself. And so they split us, which was really overwhelming, because we had to go around to complete strangers in groups of 10 to, again, relive and tell those stories. And that was really hard on us sisters. We were vulnerable, but thank God we were strong enough, and we had our ancestors and our nanas with us to really be strong in that space. And that was a big part of having that influence in that Royal Commission. And we did find out that really that Royal Commission was looking at international waste and wanting to bring that international waste in our state of South Australia. So South Australia is a very unique state in that we've been tested on, they mine us, they pressure us to be the waste dump solution for the world, because there is no textbook on this, and they now promote us as the state of defence. It is an absolute shame. And just recently we had an AUKUS public inquiry. One of our hearings were held on Kaurna country, and Labor were really vocal about what we were doing there and what was going on. So we did our job. We rattled them, and we really need to continue to do that. And just a quick shout out to everybody. Check out the AUKUS public inquiry, put in your submissions because we really want to hear your voices and your concerns around this AUKUS agreement and the very little transparency that they give us, and there's no knowledge of what happened. History repeating itself, secrecy around the British nuclear testing program, secrecy around AUKUS agreement.
Thank you, Karina. And I think it's always really important to celebrate the wins, because sometimes we know what they are, sometimes we don't know. Like if we hadn't been there, if you hadn't been on country, fighting and opposing, we don't know what would be here now. And I think about the Jabiluka campaign, the wonderful campaign where one of the largest environmental campaigns in Australia, where hundreds of people, thousands of people went up to Kakadu to fight against the Jabiluka uranium mine in the late 1990s, and worked with traditional owners up there, the Gajami traditional owners, Yvonne Margarula, who called for people to come up and stand with her, and that was an amazing win. But it's also still going. It's only just this year. Jabiluka lease being able to be incorporated into the Kakadu National Park. So it's not over. It's a long fight. These things go for a really long time. And I always remember what Yvonne, she says, the problems, the promises never last, but the problems always do. And so I was just thinking, there's a lot. We were talking, Karina and Aunty Sue and everyone, there's these threads around everything that's going on here, which is around kind of secrecy and lack of transparency, and everyday people having to do so much work to find out what is actually happening behind the curtain, behind the veils. And I was reading Kieran Finane's wonderful book about, it's called Peace Crimes, about the 2016 peace pilgrims at Pine Gap, and she begins that story by linking three different people's positions in one time. So the protesters who were walking onto Pine Gap, her own sort of place, living in Alice Springs, not really knowing that was happening, and then also an Afghan man called Haji Rees, who was coming to the grips with the murder of 15 people in his home by a missile from a US drone strike, and connecting the fact that those three things happening all at the same time are also interconnected with what's happening here, with what's happening at Pine Gap. And I guess, Rita, I had this question for you. Is there any... We know that what's happening there has been interlinked, David just mentioned, with what's happening overseas, but is there currently any legal barriers stopping Australian intelligence from being used, or including in civilian sites in Israel, Palestine, Lebanon, or is it just talking points? Or is there any actual policy? Do we know?
Yeah, so the Australian government talking point on Pine Gap is we have no comment. We don't comment about Pine Gap. But legally, there's nothing really we can do domestically, and international law is, only as strong as the institutions that uphold it. So really, we do need domestic laws to put in barriers. Yeah.
So no, is it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And David, given that you're inside, maybe banging your head against the wall a little bit, but you're also doing so much work and thinking about. It's so great seeing you inside asking those questions. What is it like for you, trying to hold the government accountable and some of the things that you do get traction on?
Yeah, well, I mean, sometimes you go into those rooms and you go into, say, a Senate estimates room where you're asking them defence and foreign affairs for a couple of days on end. And I've got 150 people in there and they are so committed to this project. And when they talk about sharing information, targeting information, security information with the US and Israel, they celebrate it and they really value it. And they talk about how important it is to be in Five Eyes, which is this, intelligence sharing between Australia, the US, Canada, the UK and New Zealand, as though it's some kind of equal partnership. Well, we get whatever the US wants to give us out of Five Eyes, right? And they give us a curated view of the world based on US interests. And we celebrate just giving them a complete full access to all of our information. And we get back this curated worldview. It is extraordinary sometimes watching it. And we're talking about how this is connected, and I've been, making this argument that if you want to know why we have been why the government has been so pathetic and worse, complicit on Gaza, why we keep sending weapons parts into the F-35 fighter jet, non-lethal weapons parts, according to Penny Wong, of course, but, why we keep sending and why we send military assets into the UAE and why we never stand up to the United States and why we literally are part of that, the answer about why we're so pathetic on Gaza comes back to our toxic relationship, our vassal state relationship with the United States. Because if we said to the US, well, actually, we're going to sanction Israel. We are going to sanction them. We're not going to send them armoured steel. We're not going to send them parts for their fighter jets. We're going to put financial sanctions on Israel. If we said that to the United States, our government is deeply frightened about what the US would do back to us. And they think, oh, my God, they might cancel AUKUS. And I think, well, actually, how terrible. Imagine that. When you go through I have quiet chats sometimes with people from other political parties, Coalition and Labor. And, they'll say, oh, David, I really, respect the work you do, very quietly, and I never say it publicly. But they say, if we did this, right, what would the US do? What would the US do? And you can see this fear in their eyes. And so, down there they pretend the country they fear is China. And they try not to say it, but the country that they are building all of these weapons for, connecting with the US for, is actually, a growing power in our region. It's part of the world. We have a major trading relationship with it. We have increasingly rich people-to-people connections with China. China is not some kind of perfect state. I mean, it's got some appalling human rights issues. It's building a large military. It's got its own interests. But we also have this, this connection with them. And they're planning to go to war with China on behalf of the US, together with the US, in order to pacify the US, because at the end of the day, the country they're scared of is not China. The country they're scared of is the one that has a base over there, has Marines over there, B-52s over there, submarines over there, and that's the one they're deeply fearful of. And I think we should recognise that. It's fear as well.
Do you know when the Chinese warships came through South Australia? Did you remember that? There was 3 warships. Well, they came up to our country and they timed their arrival right on the return of the first Varda rocket. They were right there then, and that one came through. So if there's not a connection there somewhere, well, then I'm dumb.
Yeah, and just quickly, the distorted narrative we get. We all would have seen the national panic in the mainstream media about a Chinese missile launch that happened in the Pacific. We all saw that. Bad thing, right? We don't want China to be launching intercontinental ballistic missiles. When you look at what our Pacific neighbours say, they say this is really bad. You shouldn't do this. But when you look at what our Pacific neighbours say, they say China shouldn't do this, the United States shouldn't do this, nobody should be doing this in our region, because China's launched one, okay, that we're aware of. Yeah. The US, 3 times a year, fires off an intercontinental ballistic missile from the west coast of the US, lands it in our side of the Pacific 3 times a year, an intercontinental ballistic missile, but they're doing it not to destabilise, they're doing it for safety reasons, and that's the difference.
I was just wondering, as I said before, there's a wide range of sort of knowledge here, but you talk about, this Australia drawing us into a potential war with China. Can you, or a US war with China? Can you talk more about that and how is that possible? Why is that possible?
Well, I mean, Richard Marles, in a kind of accidental moment about 18 months ago, and he's not what I'd call a political genius. He doesn't have a great gift of communication, but he accidentally said about 18 months ago, when he was asked in a defence forum put on by News Corp, so it was a pretty neutral space, and he felt quite comfortable in that space to talk, and he said, well, look, of course that if, the US goes to war with China, of course we'd be involved. We've got their bases, we've got their Pine Gap, of course we'd be involved. And everyone said, nodded. And just think about it, right? We haven't really spoken about the submarines, but what is the purpose of us getting a handful of nuclear submarines, right? This AUKUS plan means by the end of this decade, we might have 3 second-hand Virginia-class submarines, 3. And if you have 3, You know, we spent, like, by that stage, we'll have spent about $150 billion. If you have 3 of them, you got one in, you know, refit, one coming back to get restocked, and you got one on station, right? So all of this project to have one submarine on station, that's going to keep us safe and keep the world safe. It's crazy. So it's obviously not to keep Australia safe. So why are we doing this? Well, the whole purpose of us doing this AUKUS thing is to enmesh us in the US military so we can never get out of it, to make the project too big to fail. And so our nuclear submarines, if we ever get them, and I don't think we will, but if we do, their job is just to lurk off the coast of China as part of a broader US deployment and literally shadow and follow Chinese nuclear submarines as they leave their bases and then hopefully sink them in the first, you know, moments of a war. They're not Australian assets, they're US assets. And so if we've got nuclear submarines up in there, and increasingly we have, you know, more and more Australian personnel embedded on US nuclear submarines across the Pacific, we've got US bases here, US submarines based off Perth, Pine Gap, Tyndall, Darwin. There is no way with this kind of deployment that we would even have a choice about it. When the US goes to war, it'd be like, you know, what happened in World War II. You know, when the UK went to war, our Prime Minister said, so of course we are also at war. This would be, it just will be an inevitable reality. We won't have a choice about it. When the US chooses to go to war, if it chooses to go to war, whenever it chooses to go to war, we will be part of it unless we get out of AUKUS, unless we get rid of these bases.
Yeah. Jess, can I just add one little thing? When we had the AUKUS hearing in Perth, we had heard, in Fremantle, we had heard from Linda Reynolds, opposition. She was a defence minister. She said clearly on record that we were already at war with China. So that raises a lot of eyes and a lot of red flags that we're already at war with China now, currently. So you understand then with AUKUS and all the mobilisation that's happening now, it's all going ahead, and that's the concerns. We need to have a coordinated approach. We need to know what is happening across our states and territories because there are so many moving parts when it comes to AUKUS and this agreement, which is a worry that we can't be complacent, is what I'm saying.
I was actually interested in hearing more about what you've been hearing in the public inquiry, Karina. I'll come to that in a second. But Rita, you say that Pillar 2 of AUKUS gets much less public scrutiny, and but you've described it as a new frontier of warfare with no red lines and almost no So what is it? What is Pillar 2, and what is behind the curtain?
Well, it's highly classified, so...
I keep asking you this question.
So it's highly classified. Apparently includes the new frontier of technology, so artificial intelligence, hypersonics, electronic warfare, quantum. It's all the stuff which is also part of the US bill, which is about to pass Congress in the US to join the military-industrial bases of Israel and US. Which is also focused on artificial intelligence, quantum, electronic warfare, etc., and data fusion, so fusing Israeli and US data. So essentially right now we have a US-Israeli industry, a US industry which is building in Australia. Our Defence Industry Minister Pat Conroy says that sector has grown 35% since the Albanese government came to power in 2022. They're building a workforce around this, which of course makes it politically much more difficult to change. And this is just the small beginning. The goal stated openly in our defence strategy was to make Australia a top 10 weapons exporter in the world, to be the largest offshore manufacturer of US weapons. And what we are now facing is that this is going to grow at a much faster pace because of that US bill, because Israel will have access to a lot more US money than it did before. Before it was military aid that was given through specific bills, and we knew the figure. Now Israel will have access to discretionary US budget money, which is around $1.5 trillion. So that sector is likely to grow. And that means that our US industry here on Australian soil is about to become the US-Israeli industry on Australian soil. And that sector is going to grow and be employing many, many Australians. And we really need to step up in the face of that.
Oh, Rita, that might lead me on to your wonderful work on the Red Lines package. Maybe you could tell us about that.
Yeah, I would love to. Thank you. Okay, so, somewhere during this current phase of genocide, me and some other lawyers decided that we had enough of just witnessing what was happening and decided that it was time to manifest being in government and and to draft the laws that we think Australia needs to have. And hopefully, if this government doesn't pass them, we will all take note and then replace who is in Parliament over time so we can have a government that will pass this package. Whatever white supremacy exists in Parliament does not exist in my soul, and I do not want a country that is multicultural as Australia, as diverse as Australia, that is as strong with First Nations culture and history and soul as Australia, to be anything where we are going right now. So we are going to be hopefully legislating with the right Parliament a package of legislation that includes 4 bills at the moment. This is, we're going to learn a lot from the introduction of this package. It's coming in September this year into Parliament. I'd like to recognise Senator Lydia Thorpe and Senator Fatima Payman, who brought in the last version. They brought in the last version of this package in the last Parliament, which helped us attract many more lawyers to work on it. And this time around, it's going to have a new face, bringing it into Parliament, and we hope that the Greens will be strongly supporting, because we are strongly relying on the amazing evidence base which overwhelmingly has been built by Senator David Shoebridge and his compelling work in Parliament. And those 4 bills, one is to stop trade with the illegal settlements anywhere in the world. Obviously, there is one particular set of illegal settlements which are recognised as illegal right now. It is to insert amendments into our Defence Trade Control legislation and Customs Act to stop us exporting any sort of military-related goods or services where there's a real risk of contributing to war crimes, crimes against humanity, or genocide. One would think that that's already in our law, but it's not. So that's going to be important. There's also some legislation to stop us funding with our public money, so the Future Fund, charities, our superannuation funds, investing in illegal settlements and in genocide risk. And we have a 4th bill, which is setting up almost like a genocide prevention policy, but it's a little bit like the Modern Slavery Act, except it's a lot stronger. It has legal avenues for enforcement and accountability, and also requirements around due diligence and the ability to bring prosecutions as well as public interest litigation against ministers and senior managers in government, as well as corporate senior managers. That will apply. That will apply to large companies that earn over 100 million, any defence company, whatever its revenue, universities, the Future Fund, etc. And just one final point I want to make is that our super industry is one that we really need to pay attention to, because just in the last year, the Albanese government was very proud to say that a couple of $1 trillion worth of our Australian retirement savings are going to be invested in the US economy, and that was a great selling point for great proud point to raise with the US government when he was over in Washington. Now the US economy is obviously quite dominated by military, and their budget, particularly their discretionary budget, is a majority of that is for military spending. So we need red lines in Australia. We need red lines. And this package doesn't say that, there is a genocide there, or we must stop AUKUS. It doesn't do that. All it does is apparently do what we are already doing, which is upholding international law domestically. So I really look forward to seeing the Labor Party strongly support this package.
Yeah.
What an incredible amount of work.
Let's collectively hold our breath for that. But, there's the language that is used in Parliament and on all this stuff is so Orwellian. So the existing Defence Controls Act actually has a set of criteria the minister should look at before approving exports. And one of them is crimes against humanity and war crimes, right? And it was always my assumption before I started doing this work more intensely that meant if the weapons were going to go and facilitate a war crime or a crime against humanity, you wouldn't send the weapons there or weapons parts there. That was my reading of it. But I was wrong because it turns out that's just a factor you take into account, including with the national interest. And it turns out the national interest can trump whether or not you want to worry about the weapons going into a war crime or crimes against humanity. So absolutely, the way that the laws are drafted are designed to allow for this to happen. And can I just one other Orwellian thing was in my mind about the 35% increase, and they talk about in our sovereign defence industries, and they talk about this. And was it patriotic nationalism we got from Conroe the other day? Progressive nationalism. Do you know? Labor changed the definition of what a sovereign defence industry is about 3 or 4 years ago. Previously, it used to be a defence industry that was owned and controlled by Australians. That kind of makes sense to me. But you see, that gets in the way of us giving money to Rafael Australia or Lockheed Martin Australia or British Aerospace Australia, all these overseas owned subsidiaries, which is really where the core project is. So they've changed the definition of a sovereign defence industry and asset to something which has an Australian ABN. That's it. So Lockheed Martin Australia is a sovereign Australian defence industry. All these Israeli weapons manufacturers that have wholly owned subsidiaries, they're all, you'll be pleased to know, because Labor says they are sovereign defence industries. That is how you get this surge of investment in, overseas weapons manufacturers.
Future made in Australia.
Yeah, a future blown up in Australia.
Well, talking about sovereign defence industries, where we want to offer some kind of ideas about going forward, not just which Rita has done and David does on a daily basis, and Aunty Sue and Karina do every day of their lives. I was just wondering, what can be done in reality in terms of where we're at politically with our ties to the US. We're only furthering those. What do we hope to see? How can we change this?
I might just jump in quickly, just by quickly keeping the conversation going. Like, you're all here. We're all talking about it here. We're all planning and strategizing, and we all go back to our states and territories, and we need to keep those conversations going. We need to be proactive in spaces, like AUKUS public inquiries or, protesting at Pine Gap. All of this movement is really our role that we can play as individuals to keep things going. Parts of my thinking as well is around how do we bring this next generation coming up as well to really keep them involved and engaged in this space, which is so important. It's lovely to see children around here. We've got to go back and think. It's got me thinking about how to engage with my mob, how do we get them to be active and proactive in this space, to carry those stories of those old people, to make sure that we are strong on country and language and our culture, that we are keeping those strong foundations there, but we are also challenging the system. And I think we need to constantly do that as well. So, just by being proactive and attending and being part of events like this, but also being mindful of what is happening. Aunty Sue and I will fly down to Adelaide, ready for IPAN National Conference, ready for the ALP conference, national conference that's happening in Adelaide as well on Kaurna country. So being present is where people know that we are vocal about this as well.
Yeah, and just keep remembering that, the human cost and all of this, what the government is doing. They keep wheeling and dealing in stolen real estate too. But the human cost is never ending. And it's not just in Australia, Palestine. And when they let off those bombs at Maralinga and Emu and Montbello, the nasty part was they already knew what those things could do because Hiroshima and Nagasaki copped it. So why did they want to, put on more human suffering? And it's just continuous. And if we can all stand together, stick together somehow, wherever there's a need to be there and concentrate on the human suffering that these people are doing. Somebody should remind the police that they're here to protect us as well as that other mob. But, yeah, they're public servants, so they are answerable to us, not the American army or whatever, military. But, just all stay together, fight together, walk together and speak up loud and clear. And just let the government know and your politicians, whoever they are, maybe write to them. You might get some sense out of them. But with me, I'm just going on country. I've got family at home that are fighting native title, fighting government, fighting in that thing. But I don't believe in the native title system, and I don't believe the government owns my country. So I'm on country. That's it.
And I got to tell you, they hate this. They hate this. They hate anyone saying, actually, we should all have a say in the future of the country. And they think that foreign affairs and defence should be controlled by a bunch of, highly paid, deeply conflicted, soon to get a job in a weapons manufacturer, defence establishment inside Canberra. And when we first started really stepping up and doing this work, they were so affronted that we were even in the room. You don't know anything. You don't have gold braid on your shoulders. You don't, come here with an ASIO/CIA/US briefing. How dare you ask these questions? And it turns out that the reason they don't want us asking these questions is because they have zero answers to them. They have zero answers other than, this is what we've always done. We are committed to the alliance. This is all going to work. Don't you worry about that. Well, I do worry about that. I worry about that a lot. And I worry about them being in this sort of position of monopoly power over information. So what we're doing today is breaking that monopoly power over information, sharing it, and coming up with a fundamentally different imagined world we can grab, right? Where we don't just be part of this global violence that is, largely driven out of Washington through its proxies. Where we don't say our kids' future and our economic future will be making widgets for the US weapons industry or the Israeli weapons industry. Where we talk about, removing these toxic assets and militarism from our country and having a defence force that is, by all means about defending Australia, but not about threatening our neighbours and engaging in this appalling conflicts around the world. And that imagined space is actually really close. It's really close if we had the political class and the movement to make it happen. And so, yes, what we're doing here is a pretty fundamental act of resistance and creating the space for the world we want.
It sounds like we're wrapping up, but we've actually got a little bit more time, and we're going to go to the floor to ask questions. But Rita, I was wondering if you had anything else to add in terms of what we can do. I mean, you've already offered a lot in the Red Lines package, but and also, can someone grab me my jacket? I'm shivering.
Yeah, we're in the. There's a big wind.
It's over there in the green room, which is fancy over there. It's got mirrors and makeup. I think Michaela's going to. Thank you.
I've had it on my lap.
Oh.
So the 4 bills that form part of the Red Lines package are already online at redlinespackage.com.au. And there's going to be a launch in Parliament coming up in September when it's introduced. I do encourage you to go to the website and sign up for updates, because there's now a number of NGOs that are on board. If you are connected to NGOs, please also consider endorsing the package. So far, I've lost count of how many NGOs have endorsed, but the key leaders at the moment are Amnesty International, the Jewish Council of Australia, and APAN, Australian Palestine Advocacy Network. They are pushing for key moments of time for there to be really good grassroots communication happening about the bill, its progress, when it goes to Senate inquiry, and hopefully it goes to a number of committees, for there to be awareness about the questioning that happens from senators at that time, and also to be awareness at the time of vote as to how every MP votes, and then getting that awareness out to every electorate about how your MP voted. Because that really is the only information you need to take away about their position on Gaza. and West Papua and Sudan and every other place in the world that we are currently contributing to with our military goods and services. And that's the other beautiful thing about this package, universal. Yeah. Redlinespackage.com.au. Thank you so much. Please sign up for updates.
Questions? Anyone have a question? And in terms of questions, if it could just be a question, that would be great. Thank you. Yeah, we love hearing from all of you, but also, keen to have the question. I think there's one, the person just behind you, sorry. Yeah, and then you.
Yes, hi. What an amazing panel. Thank you. So I'm from Gulamudjan country. My name's Billy. So up there with all the US Marines and been a West Papua activist for many years and now Palestine. And I've been drawn to the work of Wage Peace, who have been focused on the corporations that are profiting from the harm. And I think through that awareness and the awareness of living in a capitalist system with a dying democracy of these corporations actually having more influence on policy, I see kind of AUKUS as not a defence policy but business. It's a business transaction, and there's these companies that are set to profit, and we don't say their names enough. So like companies like Thales, and I think, Rita, before you talked about all the US corporations that will be setting up business here. So we've got, Thales, which is a French multinational, and Raytheon and Northrop and BAE Systems. How much influence do you think they actually... I feel like that is why we have AUKUS, is because there's this business opportunity that these corporations have seen and they've sort of banded together. Do you think it's their influence that drives AUKUS, or it is actually a defence policy?
Well, it's not a defence policy, let's be clear. It's other than their view is enmeshing us and make us a little interoperable part of not just the US military, but as Rita was explaining with Pillar 2, the US industry and research basis. Because, the Labor government changed the law to remove the requirement to get a permit for the washing of research, weapons parts, intelligence, but really just the research and weapons parts and weapons industry that no longer needs a permit for Australia's research to be sent to the US or for US research to come to Australia, for weapons parts to go back and forth. So we no longer even have any control over that. And so it really is designed so that we become an extension of the US military industrial complex. And you think about what that means just in terms of scale. Like it's not an equal bargain. We're a pimple on a pumpkin, and it's just overwhelming any kind of domestic control we have. So that's absolutely part of it. And if you want to know how enmeshed we are, so there was a bloke in the Australian Army who was in charge of Army aviation, very high rank, had a little gold, star on his shoulder, and was in charge of Army aviation. And he made a series of critical decisions to end a European helicopter arrangement involving a Type An helicopter, to end that before its time, chop them up and bury them in the desert, right? Very Greens defence policy, that, by the way, chopping up helicopters and burying them in the desert. He did that, and then straight after was a key person in making a decision to buy a bunch of US helicopters to replace it at the cost of about $2 billion Australian, called Black Hawk helicopters. Having done that, do you know what he did in January this year? He left the Defence Department, the Defence Force, and within a week, literally a week, went from being inside the Defence Force to being the General Manager, Chief Executive Officer of Lockheed Martin Australia. Guess what helicopters Lockheed Martin Australia make? Black Hawk helicopters. But don't worry, apparently there's some secret document he signed, which means there'll be no conflict of interest. So we can rest assured. And that's what happens, right? Kim Beazley, You know, all of those, pretty much every former defence minister, procurement minister, they go from Parliament into the defence industry. Our Defence Force goes from Defence Force into the defence industry. And when I asked the Chief of Defence about this particular thing, I asked about this guy moving into being the head of the largest weapons manufacturer on the planet, Lockheed Martin. He said, why are you worried? They're part of the family.
Did Aunty Barb have a question?
We've just got a question here, and then Barb was going to come up next.
Oh, yeah.
So thanks to the panel. I have a question regarding militarism in the future beyond AUKUS. This idea of defending Australia, particularly for David Shoebridge. I'm remembering the last year the Greens announced a new defence policy to defend so-called Australia, dropping AUKUS and calling for new investment of $4 billion in domestic drones and missile manufacturing. As an abolitionist, I find this progressive nationalism deeply worrying. And the idea that you can reform the Australian Occupation Force. And I'm worried the Greens are shifting to the right under pressure at the moment. In terms of domestically owned production weapons for defence of Australia, I don't know how that's possible. A good thing when this whole continent is founded on colonialism, genocide and imperialism that's still ongoing. So I guess my question is, with the Labor Party already touting jobs and militarism as the new things to revive manufacturing, how can we have any faith in the Greens, given they could vote with the Labor Party for militarism in future following their new policy?
Well, I reckon it's a really good discussion point about what do you replace AUKUS with and how do we get the Australian population, which is what we need. We need more than half of the country to come and join us on this pathway to end our relationship with the United States, our complicity with Israel, our bit part in these appalling global supply chains for companies like Thales or Rafael or Lockheed Martin. How do we get out of that? And how do we persuade more than half of Australia to join us on this pathway? And that is actually the political project, right? This isn't going to happen through a bunch of kind of highly rarefied thinking by itself. We need a persuasive pitch where we get millions and millions of Australians say, you know what, this is my pathway too. I want to be part of this. I want to get us away from the US. I want to stop being complicit in genocide. I want to save hundreds of billions of dollars and not be part of this AUKUS thing. What's the pitch we say to Australia? And if we said to them as a political party, we're going to completely abolish the Defence Force and remove entirely towards this, that isn't the pathway that I see to getting us there. We need to say to people, well, what would a reimagining of defence be where we're no longer part of these appalling international deployments, where we step away from this, we don't buy these weapons parts and part of this industry. And our policy, we're a four-pillar party. Peace and non-violence is a core part. But our policy doesn't say abolish the Defence Force. As much as on one level I would love to abolish the Defence Force, and that should be our long-term goal, right? That absolutely should be our long-term goal, to a world that doesn't need defence forces and populations that don't call for them. But if we are going to create the mass movement that we need to persuade people, we need to reimagine in their minds what a defence force could be, to make it about defence, to say, actually, it's not here to be part of US military deployments. It's not here to project force against our neighbours. And if we do this well in Australia, and we disconnect from the US military and we stop having these weapons that can threaten our neighbours, and we say to our region, this is what we're doing. We're reimagining our military as a defensive military, and we talk about it like an echidna. We say, we would like you to do this too. And we'd like Indonesia to do it too, and we'd like the Philippines to do it too, and we'd like Vietnam to do it too, and we would like China to do it too. It would be a radical de-escalation of armaments in the region and a real signal to the world about how you can reimagine defence to be genuinely defence. And then we would have the hundreds of billions of dollars to spend upon the real threats to us, which is climate and injustice and capitalism, right? And so we need a pathway there to get more than half of the public to come along with us. And yes, that the next 3 to 5 or 10 years is not the ultimate goal, but bloody hell, let's come up with a project that we can win and win politically and have the mass movement behind us. And I think that's what we're doing.
Thank you. I think there's Barb got the question. Yeah.
Probably, thank you. Thank you, Senator, for giving your time out and coming to be with people on the ground and helping us stand up for country. And thank you, Aunty Sue and sister. Okay, South Australia won their case against the nuclear waste dump in South Australia. Once they won that, they came to the territory looking at 3 places. One was Muckery, and we won that. The other one was out on the Plenty Highway. Central Land Council went against that. They didn't want it in our region. Then they went up to Catherine and Fisher's Ridge, and they found out that it wasn't environmentally stable to have a waste dump because of the floodings and the wet during the wet. And so we won the case against the Muckery waste dump, but now we've got a salt mine, pure salt mine, southwest of here, and the traditional owners don't even know what's going to go in there, basically. So my question to you, Senator, if you can now question the members of Parliament in what's going to go in there after the salt is removed, and also Pine Gap was placed here before we even had native title or Aboriginal land rights here in the territory. One of the questions that you can probably ask in Parliament is whether the traditional owners are going to be compensated for all of those years, even before land rights came into the territory, and also on behalf of the traditional owners, ask them to be removed from this country. That's the 3 questions you should be asking parliamentarians in Canberra.
Yeah, thanks, Aunty Bob. I mean, one of the core reasons that I particularly like coming out here is getting those questions, getting that legitimacy from the community and from TOs to go and take that message back to Canberra. So absolutely all of those questions. The last time I was out here at the end of last year, down here on Arente land, went down south actually. It's about 100 k's south to where they proposed to put that salt mine. And, you know, it's this extraordinary country, isn't it? This huge... And probably, Karina, you can talk to the country more than me, but it was extraordinary country. And there's the hundreds of metres of salt from an inland sea that dried up. And, you know, you go there and you see this amazing part of the world you want to protect. And, of course, US corporate interests want to dig down into the salt, notionally for a salt mine, but actually to create a very dry underground facility, probably to put toxic nuclear waste in it. I mean, that's what they see. So we have gone and asked questions about that. We will again. But I think we should also recognise what AUKUS is about. AUKUS was the entree for nuclear waste in this country. And Labor brought legislation in about 2.5 years ago to permit them to create a nuclear waste dump anywhere in the country just by a signature, basically, of the defence minister. And part of that was trying to find a way to overcome historical resistance from First Nations peoples by taking away rights. And when they brought the first legislation in, and I really want to thank ICANN and others who helped us analyse it, the initial legislation said that not only could it be nuclear waste from Australian submarines, but it could be nuclear waste from any UK or US submarine, anywhere that has been created at any time. And, you know, neither of those countries have got a solution to their nuclear waste that they've been creating in the tons and tons since they began their nuclear submarine programs. Like the UK has dozens of decommissioned nuclear submarines, chock-a-block full of nuclear waste, and the initial draft of the legislation said they could have all come to Australia. So thank everyone for joining in with us about 2 years ago, because we forced them to amend it and say they won't take that waste, but they want to put that waste here, because they don't have an answer in the UK and they don't have an answer in the US, and we should absolutely join to stop that salt mine being part of it. Absolutely.
Hey, I want to thank everyone on the panel, and thank you to Aunty Sue and Karina. So privileged to learn from First Nations women who have been doing this for a long time. I have a question for Aunty Sue and Karina about native title. I know you touched on this briefly, but I just want to ask you both, how is native title used to undermine First Nations sovereignty, and how does it differ from land rights that were being called for, obviously for a very long time, but around the 60s, and also how does it interfere with consent around waste dumps and nuclear and all that kind of thing? Thank you.
Well, as you all know, I make no secret of my hatred for native title. It was devised by a really evil mind straight after Mr Mabo got his land rights bill passed, won that one. Then native title came in. And what it actually does to the people is divide and conquer. And it allows the people from other country to come in and say, yes, I'm a part of this. I have family here, but, you know, they're not TOs. And it allows for those people to say, yes, you can sign off and do mining. You can sign off and send rockets off on country because it's not theirs, so they don't care. And native title is actually a business. And I often wonder just who owns native title, because it's not the Aboriginal people. Yep. So I'd like to find out. My beginner, I know, you know. But I'd like to find that out, who owns it, because there is another owner. For every company we have, there's another owner. And I've been learning about all that stuff, but native title is not good. Don't believe everything you hear about native title, or don't believe anything you hear about it. Because under native title, when it first came out, I thought, oh, good, we're going to protect country. And, man, it didn't take long to get kicked in the guts and realise you didn't have the right to say no. The only rights you had under native title is to make deals with corporations and miners, and that's native title.
Thanks for the question. I once was told by an anthropologist who said native title gets you to the table to negotiate. In the past, you'd been sort of fighting over the scraps. So that was their explanation of native title. It got us to the table to negotiate to be able to do that. But not very many of our mobs have the skill of negotiation and have a clear understanding of what is in that Native Title Act. And when you get your consent determination, the rights and what you have there as well. So there's an assumption that we're all educated. Every single blackfella on this land here, we're all lawyers and anthropologists and we're all skilled. But there's a real lack of that understanding from our mobs of what is happening in that native title space. And, you know, Aunty Sue spoke about there is this division and this conquering, which is an old rule that's been played for centuries, you know, this divide and conquer. So there's a lot of work on our behalf as mob. We need to get educated in that space around what is native title and how do we use it for our determined areas and what that means, but then how do we cleverly negotiate as well? Because that's a mechanism. That native title stuff is a mechanism. And so we've got to be honouring what is really important for our mobs. And how do we make sure that we are meeting our obligations around cultural responsibilities and our protection of our culture and our language and our very important sites that sit on our determined areas. So, you know, really asking those questions and being able to build those relationships with good lawyers out there who have good understanding, who can work with mob, who can actually give us some good guidance and direction on that. Freehold land rights, and I'll talk for Anawabiyanyara lands, again, same situation. Our mobs need to know and understand every clause in that Land Rights Act and keep that strong, because that gives us the right to veto. That gives us full rights on our traditional lands, and we need to know more of that rather than being influenced by those that are knocking on that door to come in and mine and exploit and take things out. We've got to be clever that our act is actually solid enough to be able to say, no, we don't want activities coming in there. And for us to value our cultural assets that we have and be clever. So we need good skilled people, and I know there's a handful of lawyers out there, and I'm sure there's an anthropologist as well, but we need good allies, good people to guide us through a very complex machinery, and that's the machinery of native title and the machinery of land rights as well. So it's always a challenge, But again, the system floors us all the time, you know, through education, the lack of education, the constant fighting in those spaces, our health and mental health and well-being of our people as well. So they always have this upper hand over us as First Nations mob and countrymen, you know, in this space here. So we just need to find this clever balance of working closely with all you mob and really wanting to learn and understand the roles that we can play in making sure that we keep our line of direction of where we're going as First Nations mob, and then how do we be clever on how do we use that system as well. So we need to do a hard work ourselves to make sure that we've got a good understanding so we can push back, challenge, and make sure that we don't see the things in the direction of where things are going as we see today as well. So thanks for the question.
Yeah, well, as far as native title is concerned, I don't believe the government had the right to give me native title. That was given to me at birth.
Do we have another question? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yes, sorry.
Sorry, David just wanted to remind me of something, because I've told police and our Attorney General and whoever that if I break their law, it means I'm upholding mine. And I'll continue to do that.
Yes, hello. My name is Desmond Blurton, Senior Lawman in Boylan of the Bibliman Nation over there in Perth. Here in all yous talk. Thank yous very much, Karina, Aunty Sue, David, Rita and Jesse. Got there. Thank yous very much. Yes, I do deaths in custody over there and also climate activism. Coming up here, this is like the pièce de résistance of what's really going on, and it's just terrible that this is being allowed by this government and not even going to recognise our sovereignty to our lands that connects us to 60,000+ years. I want unity to come across all our peoples, because I feel our mother here crying. These sacred trees here, so beautiful. The DNA that comes out of my ancestors back over there on Budja goes straight into those trees. So these trees and everything around it is a part of us because our DNA is in there. So I just want to say that unity, we all have a part. We all have a part to play and we all can get through this. But I want to tell you this. We have our sacred tribal lands that we want for our future. And I encourage all groups to encourage our children into that future instead of them being locked up and not seeing this. It's disheartening for me to know that our children are just going to be trafficked through the guise of safety through Department of Child Protections and also the incarceration rates. When an Aboriginal person is being placed in prison, that's human trafficking. Human trafficking because we never ceded our sovereignty, and this land is being driven like it's stolen. Driven like it's stolen, nuclear waste and everything. I just want to say to you, we have a role to play. Everyone together, we can do it. Thank yous very much, everyone up there. Thank yous.
Thank you. That might be a good place to finish. And I was just hoping that maybe each of you, I was thinking you were circling back to where we started and how we got into this work. What happens now? How do you get grounded and how do you stay grounded doing this work? And what happens after you leave here? And how can you keep going? Rita, do you want to go first?
Okay, so I'm always driving forward and fighting because I just love to fight, and I think that we have to manifest what we want. We can't just wait for a government that's going to do things, right? We just have to manifest the policies and the laws that we want. I think, for example, that on this shameful issue about the incarceration of 10-year-old children, First Nations children predominantly across Australia. I thank you, Senator David Shoebridge, and also Senator Lydia Thorpe for asking questions about this in Senate estimates. The fact that our government, the Albanese government, will not use its Commonwealth power to override the states and territories and lift the age of criminal responsibility that would protect those children. Children are sacred and we should protect those children, and it's refusing outright to do it while speaking to our faces about respect. Yeah. It's too much. And it's the same with Gaza. All the words we've heard over the last few years, it's very triggering because it's words compared to the substance of violence that we are witnessing. And so how I stay grounded is focusing on forward strategies. And for me, the Red Lines package is one such strategy. I'm focused on the dehumanisation framework, another policy idea I have it's a great replacement for the IRA anti-Semitism definition, one framework to protect all people from hate speech in universities, every public institution. Come and talk to me if you want to talk about that. But I think that we also need similar legislation in the First Nations space. We need legislation to reimagine native title, legislation to lift the criminal, to wipe it away if need be, but to lift the age of criminal responsibility. And then we need to put it into Parliament. Don't wait. Put it into Parliament. See how everyone votes. Get your read of their characters now. And then organise every electorate to vote accordingly. Because at the moment there are many communities that are still very undersupported with voting, and that needs to be a collective responsibility to support those communities. So, yeah. Anyway, action is my grounding.
Not swimming in the sea or reading a book or... David, do you want to go? Yeah.
Yeah, well, I mean, coming here is kind of imagining that future that we're all fighting for. And that's what this gathering is about. And hearing from First Nations traditional owners who have that kind of historical, continuing cultural connection about what this country could be and should be. Like, that is actually incredibly important when you go into a place like the federal parliament and ask yourself, well, how can they be missing the point so much? How can they be constantly failing? And, you know, when it comes to being here in the NT, it's such a vibrant, rich, extraordinary place, culturally, environmentally, but it's also the front end, isn't it, of the occupation and the military occupation of First Nations country. You can feel it. You can see the police. You can see the military. You can feel the presence, and you can feel the occupation here in a way. It's, you know, there's a gloss over it in other parts of the country, but there's no gloss on the occupation here in the NT. And I think if that doesn't fire you up to go and say to the federal Labor government, how are you funding the Northern Territory government to do this? You know, 80% of every spithood that's put on a First Nations kid in a jail in this territory is paid for by the Commonwealth. And we say to them, how are you doing this? How do you keep funding this? Why aren't you saying we will not fund that? If you do that, we're going to redirect your funding, take it off you and give it to First Nations Aboriginal controlled organisations who might keep kids safe or build houses. And reimagine the way this thing works. And that's why we've had a juvenile justice inquiry going around hearing that kind of evidence. We know what can be done in that space. And we know what can be done with AUKUS. You know, there's a provision in it that says you can cancel it on 12 months' notice. Well, let's give it, right? Let's give the notice. Like, this is coming here reminds me that the conversation and the thinking in Canberra is so out of whack. So out of whack with what the planet needs, so out of whack with what our kids need, so out of whack with what First Nations peoples and this continent desperately needs. And I just want to thank you for it, because it actually gives us courage. And I think it gives all of us courage and strength to go back, no matter where our workplace is, no matter where our struggle is. So thanks everyone for coming. And thanks so much to the organisers for creating this space.
Aunty Sue, how do you keep grounded and what's next?
Keep grounded.
Yeah.
Obey all their laws and stick up for mine. And any time I break their law and when all talks and everything fails, they're not listening, I'll just go bush and I'll be on country. And that's where I do my fight. That's where I do my claiming of identity. That's where I teach my kids respect, culture, bushmeds. That country is our pharmacy, our butcher shop, our church spiritualities out there. It's our schools, it's everything. And if these idiots think that they're going to destroy it, Americans or no Americans, they're going to have to destroy me with it.
I don't want that happening, my Aunty Sue being destroyed. But I certainly do acknowledge that I do need to go and recharge back home on country. So I do plan to do that. But there's another fight back in Adelaide, and that's with the IPAN National Conference as well as ALP's National Conference as well. I think keeping the story going. Go back to your states and territories. Talk it up here on country. Reach out to your mobs out there as well. And just a shout out to all the First Nations, us countrymen. We've got a little job to do, and that's to go out there and talk with our own mobs as well and give them focus and direction and the valuing of our language and our laws and our cultures as well. And keep that strong and passed on for generations to come as well, because that's what grounds us. Going back to our countries and back to our roots is what will ground us and give us that strength to fight. We need you all as well to help us, because we're only a small percentage, according to the nation. We're a small percent. We need numbers and we need your help and your support. So, as David said, big shout out to the organisers and people who have been involved in pulling this conference together. This Convergence together is really important. But just put in your submissions to the AUKUS public inquiry. Check out that website as well. Have your say in this public inquiry. It's really important for us as commissioners to be hearing your concerns that you have, and the fact that if you are here in Bundwa, you are worried on what is going to happen there and what Pine Gap's role is. So keep the pressure, keep the conversations going, and take good care of yourselves as well. It's heavy. It's a really heavy space, so take good care of yourselves. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. There's also a petition that is supported by the traditional custodians that is put forward, but for the demands put forward by the traditional custodians of the Aranda people of Pine Gap, to go to the Senate to close Pine Gap and for compensation. So the demands are all over there, so make sure you sign that petition as well before you leave. And that will please join me in thanking this wonderful panel, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Together we stand.
Subject matter expert.
Yeah, not heavy at all. Really chill. Not heavy at all. I turned that off.
Hello.
Just a light Sunday
Oh, just before people head off, just wanted to see if anybody is up for doing a volunteer shift in the next 24 hours. Please head to the welcome tent, because we're just a tiny bit thin on the ground at the moment. And to let you know that there is a roguely parked grey Hyundai i40. If it's yours, move it. Thank you so much. Thank you. The number plate is CF12UU. So we're going to have lunch now from 12 till 1 till 2:15. We've got workshops, and then 2:15 to 2:45 break, 2:45 to 4 p.m. workshops. And we would love people to help us pack down at the end of the day, because we've got to move out and get over to camp and get planning for something very exciting. So, those are the times. And also, someone's lost their Hilton swipe card. So, I'm staying there if you don't come and get it from me.
Can you also say...
Oh, and thank you so much to the live stream. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you were moved and energised by that fucking amazing session. Thank you so much. Bye.